All right. Hi, everyone. So before we start the main order of business, just a little announcement slash reminder. So there's a final project proposal form, which you can find in the assignment section of the Blackboard site. Now, this is due to me by email rather than through Blackboard itself, which is the way we're doing the actual assignments in PDF form. By 1 minute to midnight on Friday, March the 27th. Now, the purpose of this thing is to allow me to make sure that your project topic makes sense, that you're going to have enough to go on in terms of the resources, the references that you're using. Now, if you have any questions about this, then do feel free to post them to Slack, or you can organize a meeting with me or your TF. So once you've done this, as quickly as possible after March the 27th, I'll email each of you individually with feedback, after which you can feel free to start the project itself. Another thing to point out here is that I made an example of what this might look like. I've imagined that I was about to do this and put together a project proposal to look at the representation of various British dialects in the Red Wall series of fantasy novels by Brian Jakes. So you can take a look at that if you're at all wondering what this should look like. Anyway, to business. So just checking that this is working properly. Just checking.
This is a sound test.
Okay, seems good. Right then. This slideshow is about Singlish and Indian English. I'm going to break this into two parts just to make it more digestible. So this video will just cover Singlish, and then I'll upload a separate one covering Indian English. So let's get on with it. Here is a couple of maps showing you the location of Singapore. It's a city-state just off Malaysia. Singapore, along with Penang and Malacca, constituted what were called the Straits Settlements, which were important trading ports for the British Empire. Now, the Straits Settlements became independent of Britain in 1957, and at the time it was called the Federation of Malaya, and that was renamed Malaysia in 1963. Singapore left the Federation in 1965 for political reasons and became an independent city-state, which it remains. Now, within Singapore, Malay is recognised as an official language, and Mandarin and Tamil are widely used, Tamil being a language originally from southern India. It's a Dravidian language. But English is dominant in business and in education, and many Singaporeans speak it as their first language. Now, like all varieties of English, Singaporean English displays a range of variation according to social class and to formality of the situation and so on. So there's a spectrum from standard Singaporean English at one end to the most non-standard forms of Singaporean English on the other end. Those most non-standard forms are also known as Singlish. Now, standard Singaporean English, as you would expect, is much closer to varieties of English with which you will all be familiar, but it's still pretty distinctive. Singlish, the sort of more non-standard versions, has a number of features which make it rather more distinct, and in some cases will be harder for you to understand. Now, to illustrate each of these, I've got a couple of videos here that I'm going to show you on YouTube. The first one is a native Singaporean giving you a Singlish lesson. Now, the narration for the lesson itself is in standard Singaporean English. So as you listen, try to pick out what's special about her phonology compared to other standard Englishes. Then the second video, which I'll show you, is in Singlish. And it's kind of an interesting one. I'll introduce it separately in a bit. But first, let's go ahead and navigate to this YouTube video here.
There's no such thing as a perfect writer. This is why I use Grammarly to check my work.
I am Singaporean. I am born and bred here, have been living here for 30 plus years. So Singlish is kind of like a slang. We kind of have our own accent, which is really strong. We use certain words that other people may not understand. A lot of these funny words that we use are borrowed from the languages that are spoken in Singapore, like Malay, Tamil, Chinese, and all the other like Mandarin dialects. So if you're a foreigner watching this, today you'll be learning the basics of Singlish. So one of the key features of Singlish is that sentences or words are often shortened. I guess Singaporeans do this because it's just a more efficient way of getting your message across, or maybe we're just lazy. So for example, never mind becomes never mind. I don't want it becomes don't want. Excuse me becomes excuse. Like that becomes like that. Another key feature about Singlish is that the sentence structure is often just directly translated from Mandarin. So if, for example, you wanted to know the time, instead of saying, what is the time now? In proper Queen's English, you say, now what time? Because that's translated from Mandarin, 现在几点? Another feature of Singlish is that we love to repeat words. For effect, for example, you ask a Singaporean, may I take this? The Singaporean would reply, take, just take. Another key feature of Singlish is that we tend to be very lazy and we tend not to complete the word. So the end of the word is probably just dropped. If you want to say act with the T, right? Singaporeans would just say act. If you want to say find, you would most likely say find. It's really difficult for me to say find. It sounds really pretentious, like I'm really up my own ass. Next, the top 5 essential Singlish words that you have to learn. The first one is quintessential to all Singaporeans, which is L-A-H, la. What la means? Nothing. It means nothing. It's a little bit like saying, this is the best shit, yo. You know, yo, what does it mean? Yo doesn't mean anything. It's just to make a sentence sound a little bit more casual. So instead of saying, I can, which is like a very serious answer to somebody and it's not casual and friendly, you say, can nah. The next word is ayo, and Singaporeans love to use this word as a kind of exclamation for something that usually isn't very positive. For example, ayo, why so expensive? It's like, what? Why so expensive? For example, if you spilled something, you can say, ayo, spill. So the next word is one of my favorite words to use all the time, and it is xiao. It simply means crazy, and usually it comes with this hand action to the temple. Wow, she's over there eating her underpants xiao ah. Next word is sian. Most of the time it can mean like bored, or that you're feeling restless or defeated. If you say, how was your exam results? The person will reply, !aiya, all C lah, sian. Singaporeans also love to say walao which is an exclamation that doesn't really mean anything also. It's a bit of disbelief or shock. Usually at something that's not good, you would say, walao park I way out of the line. If I'm walking outside, and then I'll just be like, walao why so hot today? If you're learning a foreign language, obviously you have to learn the curse words.
So I'll stop it there. So you'll have to sort of go back and listen out for these curse words yourself. I do recommend that you do this because they're some of the best inventory of curse words that I've heard in the entire English-speaking world. But anyway, so that's standard Singaporean English. Now, as an illustration of Singlish, what I've got here is a fan dub. So there's this subculture on YouTube of taking clips from movies and overdubbing them with one's own voice acting. And there's a subculture of this, of doing this, redubbing films into Singlish. And so this is a scene, a fan dub of a scene from the movie Frozen. So see what you can pick out from it in terms of the language they're using itself. For those of you that don't know Singlish already, it'll be quite difficult to understand, but there are subtitles at the bottom. And then also on the phonological side, listen hard to how they pronounce the word, the name of the reindeer, Sven. They do something kind of interesting with that initial consonant cluster. So here we go.
Let's talk about Grammarly, the digital writing assistant more than 20 million people use to connect their...
Hang on a minute. It's doing this thing again. So let me... Just 1 second.
Hang on, we like to 表 one. Faster, better. 喂，卡克来卡， this one freshly lacquered one leh. You lao bu never teach you manners, is it? Pui. Got law. Tell me, why the queen suddenly kiss you on?
Actually, everything my fault lah. I got engaged but then she got crazy because I just met him on that day and then she said she no bless our marriage for.
Wait, you got engaged to someone you just met that day?
Yeah lah, and then I got angry. Then she also angry. Then she tried to escape, so I grabbed her gloves.
You telling me that you got engaged to someone you just met that day?
Yeah, listen first, Ken. Anyway, then she always wear those gloves, so I thought maybe she really that gassy, like germs also cannot one.
Your lao bei lao bu never warn you about strangers, man.
They got law, but chance not stranger lah.
Sure, bo. What's his surname?
Of the southern us lah.
Favorite food?
Sandwiches lah.
Best friend's name?
Maybe John.
Eye color?
Yen Tao.
Food size?
Food size never mind one.
You got part with him before? You don't like how he makan then how leh? You also hate the way he all pisai then how?
All pisai.
Jiak pisai.
Oi, sir, he is a prince.
All men do it.
Yeah. I don't care what you say, it's true love.
Doesn't sound like true love, lor.
You love expert man.
No, but I got love expert friends, oh.
You got love expert friends? I don't believe.
Diam ah.
No. I want to see your love expert.
Serious oh. Sven, 走！
See me already.
狼
See how
Relax, I handle. You just don't fall down and kena jiak can now.
I come and help.
No!
Why not?
Your judgment super off, yeah. You say one more time. Which bodo? See guy then marry.
It's true love.
Oh. God!
Christopher.
Christoph lah!
Siama.
You almost burned me, you know.
But I never lost. Sven, prepare.
You don't give command. Only I can. Jump, Sven. Walao, I just higher pay finish there. Oh, alamak. Oh, 笑了。
Hang on. Pull, Sven, pull. Oh. I buy you new one, okay? Everything I also replace.
Really?
And as you can see, there's a vast array of these, including Singlish Aladdin and so on, if you're curious. But anyway, let's go back over here. So just some of the phonological features that you might have heard there. So voiceless stops are usually unaspirated, even when they would be aspirated in other varieties of English. So instead of the aspiration you get in tap, for example, you get something much more like that. As for th and the, they tend to be eliminated, not across the board, but pretty commonly. So the pattern is usually to get th stopping before vowels, so that becomes dat, but th fronting at the end of words, so teeth becomes teeth. With the vowels, there tends to be a merger of the tense lax distinction, so the e and e both become e, and e and both become e, and so on. There's some word final devoicing, that is, you don't get voiced stops pronounced as voiced at the ends of words. And actually, the standard Singaporean English speaker from the first video, you will have heard her do this when she was pronouncing the word word. So she pronounced it as what, with a voiceless sound. There's also a consonant cluster reduction, which was amply exemplified and discussed explicitly in the first video. And then there's some tendency to vocalize final L. So you might remember that Cockney does this. But Singlish is slightly different in that you vocalize it not to a rounded w sound, but rather an high back unrounded vowel. So you can hear the first speaker in the first video do this when she says, oh no, I spilled in Singlish, I spew. That's that vowel And you can see that the IPA symbol for it is essentially an upside down M. Anyway, some lexical stuff. Some of these turned up in the videos as well, of course. So stay meaning reside. A bunch of these are borrowed from other surrounding languages. So Malay gives it sia, and makan meaning sia meaning just an exclamation, makan meaning to eat. Hokkien, which is a Chinese language, gives it xiao, crazy, and xian, bored or put out. And then another feature which is common through a number of East Asian cultures is use of uncle and auntie as respectful terms of address for older addressees or more honoured addressees, regardless of whether they're related to you in any way or not. There's also great series of sentence final particles. Now, Chinese languages, including Mandarin and Hokkien, have these, and they indicate a vast array of meanings. Adding ma at the end indicates argumentativeness, for example. La, which the first video mentioned explicitly, has a lot of meanings, which gives the impression that it has no meaning at all, but it does do something to the pragmatics of the sentence, which the person in the video also discussed. So you can use it for emphasis, to indicate friendliness, solidarity, a number of other things. Questions are often marked with a at the end, rather than doing the auxiliary question formation movement rule that we saw earlier in the semester. And there's a whole bunch of others. Here's one of my favorites here, which is argument drop. This is where a direct object can be essentially left out, and this can be understood as a pronoun. So like in the first little dialogue at the top of this slide here, A says, David say his mother speak Teochew. B says, wait la, John say speaks Hokkien, where the gap is corresponding to what would be she in other Englishes. And then in the second dialogue here, David like his school, says A. B says John also like. Now, there's an interesting sort of semantic fact about these questions, which tells us something about the way that we want these things to be analysed. So it seems that argument drop, and this is the argument that Sato 2015 makes, should be analysed not as just literally like leaving out something, but rather having it there and then deleting it. So much as other Englishes have a rule of verb phrase ellipsis that we looked at, Singlish has a rule of noun phrase ellipsis. And the reason we can tell that this is true goes back to a feature of the way that you can understand the dialogue at the bottom of the slide. So consider, just going back to other Englishes, consider this version of the same dialogue. So David likes his school and John does too, with verb phrase ellipsis, right? Now, you'll notice that has two readings. One, David likes his school and John also likes David's school. And then another reading where his in the ellipsis site corresponds to John. So David likes his school and so does John. That could mean David likes his school and John likes John's school, right? So there's those two readings, which make sense for verb phrase ellipsis, because we know that there's a full representation of that verb phrase there, which is deleted, and so there's a pronoun in the his, which can naturally co-refer either with David or with John in that kind of context. Now, the interesting thing about the dialogue at the bottom of the slide in Singlish is that the same thing is true. So David like his school, John also like can be understood as meaning John likes John's own school or John likes David's school. So Sato points that out and on the basis of that argues for a rule of noun phrase ellipsis that's present in Singlish but not present in other Englishes. Alsagoff and Ho in the readings have a great little side-by-side comparison of Singlish and standard Singaporean English. I refer you back to that. They appear on the slides here, but I won't sort of sit and read through them for you. I will, though, highlight just one thing here. So you'll notice in the Singlish version here, the second sentence is, anyhow do, wait, cane a scolding. If we go next slide, the translation into standard Singaporean English is, if you don't, you may get told off. So Kena here, which is not something we have in other Englishes, is essentially a sort of passive construction. It's replacing get told off. So Kena scolding. There's just like a whole different auxiliary that Singlish has that isn't present in other Englishes. And there's lots more going on here. You'll notice word order differences as well if you look closely. But anyway, I refer you back to Alsagoff and Ho, which is on the reading list for that. Just to summarize some of the syntactic features. In the colloquial Singaporean English, which is what CSE stands for on this slide, you tend, which is sort of a posher way of calling Singlish. You get auxiliaries and past participles being used less and being replaced by adverbs. So instead of something like my father passed away or my father has passed away, in Singlish you'll tend to get things like my father passed away already, where the verb is just in its bare form, no auxiliary, no past tense marker, but the past tense meaning is given by the presence of already at the end of the sentence. One other syntactic feature which is really quite kind of extraordinary and very, very, very different than other Englishes, is use of one as a relative pronoun at the end of the relative clause. So a relative pronoun is something like who in a sentence like, that boy who pinched my sister is very naughty. In Singlish, rather than having that who there, you replace it with one, but it goes at the end of the relative clause. So that boy pinched my sister one, very naughty. This is really a kind of a really, really rather different sort of typologically speaking bit of syntax here, which has something to do with the way relative clauses are formed in Chinese languages, which is rather different, but the connection is very indirect. Finally, just to close off Singaporean English, the syntax of questions is somewhat different. So I'm not going to go through this here, but you can see Alsagoff and Ho for the details. So there's the fact that Singlish is WH in situ, which means that you don't move question words like who or what to the front of the sentence usually. You just leave them where they would normally be. And then for yes, no questions, there's something called an or not question that Alsagoff and Ho discuss. And then in tag questions, now tag questions are things like she's coming, isn't she? Or we're late, aren't we? Those like questions that you sort of tag on to the end of a sentence to get confirmation from somebody or check that somebody agrees. In other varieties of English, those tag questions change form depending on the subject and of the sentence. But in Singlish, you get a invariant sort of tag question. So we are late, isn't it? She's coming, isn't it? That kind of thing. Okay, that's all I've got on Singaporean English. I'll stop here just so that this is short-ish and digestible. And I'll see you in the next one where we'll discuss Indian English.